conflict, layers of history uncovered. The story of Gaza and Israel is etched in a century of upheaval. Clues lie in British colonial archives and war room documents. Under the 1922 League of Nations mandate, Britain pledged to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine, but also to protect the rights and position of other sections of the population. Jewish immigration surged, funded by Zionist organizations, while Palestinian Arabs resisted what they saw as a land grab. Tensions over land purchases and population shifts repeatedly escalated into violence. Arab revolts in the 1930s and conflicting promises from London set the stage for the catastrophe to come. 1948 war and the Palestinian exodus. The catastrophe came in 1948 when Israel declared independence. Arab armies invaded immediately, and hundreds of villages were destroyed. Israel's victory by 1949 left roughly 750,000 Palestinian Arabs uprooted from their homes. The small coastal Gaza Strip swelled with refugees, more than anywhere else in the war. Egyptian forces took control of Gaza, turning it into a crowded camp for the displaced. As one history notes, Gaza became the place where Palestinian refugees were most heavily concentrated, under Egyptian military rule. Even today, Gaza's 2.3 million residents largely descend from those 1948 refugees. Many Gazans still consider themselves refugees and carry yellowed keys and deeds to family homes now inside Israel. Those rusting keys have become potent symbols of loss. Palestinians insist on a right of return. Israel flatly refuses. As one NPR reporter notes, the only reason Gazans want to go back is because they have no alternative. Gaza under Egyptian rule and Israeli occupation. From 1948 until 1967, Gaza was administered by Egypt. Its boundaries, the 1949 armistice lines, held firm. That changed with the 1967 Six-Day War. Israel captured Gaza from Egypt. Israel then imposed a military occupation over Gaza. Limited Palestinian self-rule was later negotiated, but Israel retained control of Gaza's airspace, coastline, and borders. In fact, the United Nations and most legal experts continue to regard Gaza as effectively occupied by Israel, since it controls Gaza's external affairs. Gaza also became a focal point of Palestinian resistance. The First Intifada and the Second both erupted from this impoverished strip. Israel responded with curfews and incursions. Checkpoints and walls cut Gazans off from the outside world. As one report observed, by the early 2000s Gaza was increasingly isolated. Palestinian demonstrators often chanted that they were imprisoned in an open-air prison. Israeli settlements and the Gaza disengagement. Meanwhile, Israeli settlement policy reshaped the landscape. After 1967, hundreds of thousands of Israelis moved into newly built communities in the occupied West Bank. In Gaza itself, a smaller settler project arose. By the early 2000s, there were 21 Israeli settlements dotting Gaza. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon shocked Israeli politics by evacuating all Gaza settlements in 2005. Over a few months that year, Israel demolished 21 settlements and moved out its soldiers and civilians. The unilateral pullout was meant to improve security and international standing, but it soon sparked debate in Israel. In retrospect, even some who supported it called it a mistake. Opposition leader Isaac Herzog remarked in 2015 that Gaza had not become a Hong Kong of the Middle East as hoped, but rather one big rocket base. In other words, critics say militants remained in Gaza and continued attacks instead of peace. Meanwhile, Israel kept thousands of Gaza's former residents under armed guard in temporary camps, and the disengagement left Gaza's status in limbo. Hamas's takeover and the siege of Gaza. In the 2000s, Palestinian politics turned Gaza upside down. The Islamist movement Hamas, founded in Gaza in 1987, won elections in 2006, and by summer 2007 had forcibly ousted its Fatah rivals, seizing full control of the Strip. Hamas's charter calls for Israel's destruction, and its armed wing vowed continued attacks. Israel and Egypt responded to the Hamas takeover by imposing a strict blockade on Gaza. Initially touted as a temporary measure, the blockade became total after 2007. Israel closed Gaza's borders and restricted all but emergency aid and commerce. Egypt largely complied, closing its Rafah crossing except for limited humanitarian traffic. Human rights groups later said Gaza had effectively become an open-air prison under the siege. Inside Gaza, life was increasingly grim. Unemployment soared and basic services collapsed. Repeated rounds of rocket and mortar exchanges between Hamas and Israel became routine. After small incursions in 2008, Israel launched major offensives. Operation Cast Lead in 2008-09, Pillar of Defense in 2012, and Protective Edge in 2014, each aiming to halt rocket fire. Each conflict inflicted heavy tolls. For example, the 2008-09 war killed around 1,200 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. In 2014, roughly 2,200 Palestinians and 73 Israelis lost their lives. Witnesses described Gaza's cities in rubble and Israel's southern towns haunted by air raid sirens and shelters. Wars, ceasefires, and the current battlefield. The pattern of hostilities continued into the 2020s. In May 2021, a brief war between Israel and Gaza militants left about 250 Gazans and 12 Israelis dead. That round began over tensions in Jerusalem, but soon turned into rocket barrages from Gaza and Israeli airstrikes. By late 2023, the deadliest escalation to date erupted. On October 7, 2023, Hamas gunmen stormed across the Gaza border in a surprise attack, killing an estimated 1,300 people in Israel. Israel responded with unprecedented force in Gaza. Over the next year, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry reported over 40,000 Palestinian deaths, though independent monitoring counted at least 20,000 by the end of 2023. Israeli authorities confirmed around 250 of their own civilians and soldiers killed. Urban areas in Gaza, already densely crowded, were pounded by artillery and airstrikes. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned of an apocalyptic situation. At one point, only 10% of needed food was reaching Gaza, leaving half the population on the brink of starvation. Occasional truces have punctuated the fighting. For example, in January 2025, U.S., Egyptian, and Qatari mediators negotiated a ceasefire. Under the deal, Hamas released 33 hostages, and Israel freed hundreds of Palestinian detainees. Displaced Gazans were then allowed, for the first time in months, to walk back to northern neighborhoods. A Reuters photo from January 28, 2025 shows families with children carrying few belongings as they march north on the coastal road to return home. The truce brought modest relief. Aid convoys began entering Gaza, and trauma clinics opened. However, the ceasefire was fragile. Israeli air operations resumed in March 2025 after militant attacks resumed. The pattern remained. Each new flare-up adds layers of ruin to Gaza and the threat of rockets into Israel, with ceasefires brokered but no lasting peace. Humanitarian toll. Across the decades, civilians on both sides have borne a terrible price. Gazans suffer immensely under blockade and bombardment. Today, nearly 60% of Gazans need humanitarian aid, and almost a third live in extreme or catastrophic conditions. Clean water is scarce. Over 90% is unfit to drink. Hospitals struggle under shortages of fuel and medicine. Aid workers report chronic malnutrition in children. International agencies warn of collective punishment. Human Rights Watch bluntly dubbed Gaza an open-air prison. Israelis, too, have been traumatized. While far fewer in number, Israeli civilians have faced chronic rocket and missile attacks. Tens of thousands in southern Israel have spent nights in bomb shelters. Dozens have been killed or maimed since the first rockets flew in 2001.